Hello, hello, hello. It's Tuesday. You know what that means. It's time for another college football theme episode of the Big D podcast. Before I bring in my special guest, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page where you can see all my greatest content. And don't forget to check out the Big D podcast on Spotify and Apple. So, joining us is the only guy who saw the Chicago Bears and Detroit Lions play on Thanksgiving, Alabama and Auburn in the Iron Bowl, and the LA Rams take on the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau. David Moulton. David, did I get everything right?
Just a week in the life. Yes, it beats working.
Yeah, how would you like to beat Troy Aikman and Gary Danielson spot up in the booth? We saw you almost as much as the broadcasters themselves.
Well, take it easy now. But Fox has a thing where they try to put everybody on screen who's working the game since we're away from our families on Thanksgiving. And then before I joined the crew in the booth, they had decided that on Thanksgiving they would wear blazers. And they didn't tell me the first year I was with them. So I was the only one who showed up in the booth without a blazer. But the last 3 years, I remembered I need a sport coat.
Yeah. Okay, so as you know, it seems like college football coaches have been going everywhere and anywhere the last 3 or 4 days. And last night, we all were shocked when Brian Kelly, the Notre Dame head coach, took his talents to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and became the new LSU coach. What were you thinking when you heard of Mr. Kelly leading South Bend?
I was a little surprised because LSU had reached out to him 6 weeks ago when they let Orgeron go, and he had politely said no. So I think we all just figured he was staying. But there were a couple of common denominators here that Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley both had the same agent. So you had LSU and USC both going through Trace Armstrong. And that's why nothing got out. I mean, as long as Trace Armstrong and his agency didn't say anything, then, nothing would get out. And obviously they didn't. The word is that Lincoln Riley preferred USC. So that left LSU to try to pursue Brian Kelly. Maybe it was just the 10 million versus him making reportedly around 5 at Notre Dame. That was the difference. Don't know. I do know he can win a national championship at LSU because the last 3 coaches all have. Whereas he's doing a pretty damn tremendous job at Notre Dame. And while he's been in 2 playoffs and he played for the national title 9 years ago, it's harder to win one at Notre Dame. And I'm guessing the combination of, hey, I got a real shot to win a title versus everything would absolutely have to line up to win one at Notre Dame. And the money. I mean, don't forget about the money. Even Brian Kelly, who was asked on November 22nd at his press conference, and he said, well, I don't think I'm going anywhere, but if somebody backs up a truck with 250 million, I don't think my wife will let me stay. And it wasn't 250, but it was 100. And, maybe that was enough. Something to keep in mind, D, is that beginning 2 years from now, 3 years, whenever it's going to be, the playoff format's going to change. And while Notre Dame may get into the playoff more, remember, what's being talked about is top 4 conference champions get buys. Well, Notre Dame's not in a conference. And their AD, Jack Swarbrick, who's on the committee to come up with a new playoff format, was asked during the summer, hey, you okay with never having a bye week and really struggling even to get home games? And he said, yeah, we're fine with that. So, as it is now, Brian Kelly, it was hard just to get in the playoff and win 2 games. Going forward, he'll have an easier time making the playoff, but he'll have to win 3. And actually 4.
Yeah, because it would almost be like the old school NFL format where the top 4 seeds would get buys and everybody else is playing in essence wild card week.
Oh. Right. Where at LSU, 1, he's probably got as good a chance to make the playoff as he does at Notre Dame. But 2, he's got a chance to get a bye. and then have multiple home games.
And also at LSU, he's got a chance to get anybody he wants, because at Notre Dame with the academic restrictions, there's no way, and you know what, he's getting some of these LSU athletes. Like, you think who was the LSU? You think Jamal Chase and Justin Jefferson would have gone to South Bend, Indiana? I think not.
Well, I will say he has recruited Louisiana effectively at Notre Dame, and he finished second at Notre Dame for this 5-star quarterback who ultimately chose LSU. So, he's had top 10, top 12 recruiting classes at Notre Dame. Think about what you can do at LSU. So, yes, it's going to be easier. There's no question about it.
Where does that leave Notre Dame? Because to me, the number one guy for the job has got to be Luke Fickell. I mean, he's doing a great job in Cincinnati. 12-0, 12-0. Got a real opportunity of winning, going 13-0, and maybe becoming the first Group of 5 team making the playoff. Is Luke Fickell who you're hearing, or the Irish looking at maybe? I can't believe I'm saying this. Urban Meyer, maybe.
I don't think Urban's realistic, to be honest. Listen, Fickell's the guy. The word is he wants the job. But if you're Luke Fickell, think about the dilemma that you may have in 5-6 days. If you make the playoff, are you really going to leave Cincinnati? I mean, there's 26 days from making the playoff to the national semifinals. Are you really going to be the head coach of Notre Dame during those 26 days while preparing Cincinnati for a national semifinal? I mean, sometimes the timing is just awful. And the opportunity is a great one, but I don't know if Luke Fickell can leave Cincinnati. And I don't think Notre Dame will say, yeah, we'll wait 4 weeks. We're good. Not when the transfer portal and early signing period is all mid-December. I really wonder if Luke Fickell, if they lose or they don't make the playoff for whatever reason, I think Luke Fickell will be the Notre Dame head coach within a week from today. But if they win, and I expect them to then make the playoff, I don't know if he can leave Cincinnati. It's a very awkward situation.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen coordinators leave. I mean, Lane Kiffin left to be the FAU, but came back and coach Alabama. Dan Mullins left Florida the first time to be the Mississippi State head coach. Other guys, Salk left Alabama.
Right. But like you said, it's one thing to be a coordinator getting promoted to head coach. It's another thing to technically be the head coach at 2 different places at the same time. And oh, by the way, you're in a national semifinal. I mean, can he really serve either school well?
No.
I mean, he may serve them at 60, 70, 80%, but he's not going to serve either school at 100%. And can he really do that to his guys at Cincinnati? I mean, every single guy on the team is there because of him. I mean, can he really leave them when they've made the playoff? I don't think he'd do it. I think he would just say, hey, timing is everything in life. And, I'm staying. And we're going to try to win a national championship and join the Big 12. And then he'll wait to see if and when the Michigan and Ohio State jobs open up.
Although those jobs are not looking like they're open anytime soon, but that's a story for
Hey, none of us saw Jim Tressel on Memorial Day weekend back in, what was that, 2011?
2011.
Yeah, they win the Sugar Bowl, they end the 2010 season, they finish in the top 5, and all of a sudden 5 months later, he's resigning Memorial Day weekend because of a tattoo controversy. So, it's college, it's big time college sports, D. Anything can happen.
Yeah, and maybe one of the, I'm not sure he was the first domino, but how about Lincoln Riley leaving Norman, Oklahoma to become the USC head coach? do you think Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma because he knows it'll be harder for you to win in the SEC? And B, can Lincoln Riley succeed sooner at SC than he did at Oklahoma?
Well, Stoops left them stacked when he walked into the job in 2017. I mean, Oklahoma was Bob Stoops took care of Lincoln Riley. It's why, by the way, if you watch Bob Stoops' reaction on Monday, Bob Stoops was not happy with Lincoln Riley. You could tell. He didn't elaborate, but the tone in his voice and what he said, you knew deep down Bob Stoops was thinking, really? I handed you Oklahoma on better than a silver platter, locked, loaded, and ready to go. And you leave in 5 years? You were at East Carolina calling plays 7 years ago. Are you serious, dude? That's what I got from Bob Stoops when he and the AD met the media on Monday. But listen, we saw with Pete Carroll. I mean, if you get the USC train rolling, there ain't nothing west of the Mississippi to stop you. Nothing. So, yeah, I think he can win and win big and win quickly. Pete Carroll had 1 6-6 year. And the next year they finished third in the country. And after that, the dynasty started. So remember, Nick had 1 7-6 season, and then he got the train rolling. Yeah, this is a job in which give him a year. I mean, hell, he's already had 5 decommits from California and Oklahoma alone who are probably going to sign with him. Never mind the transfer portal. Yeah, the USC is going to be back quickly.
Yeah, because if you look at the Pac-12, it's basically Oregon, Southern Cal, and everybody else.
Well, it's Southern Cal and everybody else. And Southern Cal is their act together. No, I mean, it just is. I mean, it is. They, Bob Ryan joked when Pete Carroll had it going at USC that this is how the conversation goes. One of the assistants says, we're a little thin at tailback. And Pete goes, really? And he opens up the window in his office and he yells, hey, we need a tailback. And 4 guys come running. All right. They don't have to go very far to put a top 5 team together, never mind if they actually recruit outside their area.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at all the quarterbacks playing or having great years not at SC. I mean, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, who may be the USC quarterback, depending on where he goes. I mean, what do you think happens with Caleb Williams? Does he stay in Norman or does he go with Lincoln Riley?
My guess is he stays, but Rattler's already entered the transfer portal. And, Oklahoma will be fine. They'll get a really good coach. It's a tremendous job. It is. It's not the USC job, though. I mean, it's just not. USC is one of the top 5 jobs in the sport. Oklahoma is one of the top 10. There's a difference.
I've heard Brent Venables could be the next OU head coach. He makes a lot of sense because he was the DC under Stoops forever. Seems like he's been at Norman for 10 years and Clemson for 10 years. I think he'd make a lot of sense.
Well, also the AD Joe Castiglione has not had a problem handing the job to a coordinator who's never been a head coach before. Because the last 2 coaches are Bob Stoops and Lincoln Riley, and neither one of them had been a head coach before and were highly touted coordinators. So
Stoops was the DC with Florida in '96 for that national championship squad, and Riley was the OC with Baker in 15. When did Riley take the job? 16 or 17?
Well, Riley did, I think, 2 years with Stoops as his offensive coordinator. And then they turned the program over to him. But the point is that, Joe Castiglione, who's one of the best ADs in the country, he is okay with giving it to someone who's never been a head coach before if he feels that this is the next guy. And so I would think Venables is on a real short list. I believe Mark Stoops just re-upped with Kentucky, reconfigured his deal. So some had wondered whether or not Mark would take the gig. If you were a brother, would you really want to follow your brother at a school? I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would be my. I'm not sure that would be my plan A, especially when you're going to join the SEC in a couple years. You're already in the conference.
Yep. It'll be fascinating to see what they do with the SEC also, D. I mean, will they just keep it East and West? Because if they do, if Oklahoma and Texas join the West is loaded. So with too many teams. So now the Alabama schools, if you go by geography, would have to join the East. And Missouri would then flip to the West, and that's how you get 8 and 8. Or they're going to go with these 4 pods, at which point Oklahoma is going to be in the same pod with Texas, Texas A&M, and probably Missouri.
I actually have got a solution to that. Put Arkansas in the East, because then you've got the Alabama rivalry, you've got both Mississippi schools, you've got both Texas schools, LSU and Oklahoma.
D, it's too top heavy. I mean, you think about the Rolls Royce programs, if you will, that are on one side, okay, and you're going to have Missouri and Arkansas play in the East. I mean, just go by geography. Split the conference in half. You got 8 on one side, 8 on the other. I mean, you got Alabama, Georgia, Florida on the one side. You got Oklahoma, Texas, LSU, A&M on the other. We're good. Let's go play.
And one other thing, the SEC is going to have a 9-game conference season. There's no way you can have 8 with 16 teams.
It depends. If they keep it 8 and 8, they could stay with 8, in which everybody plays everybody, and then you have one crossover game. If they go to the 14 pods, they will jump to a 9-game schedule. It works out from a scheduling standpoint better that way.
Yeah, so while we're on the SEC train, how about Billy Napier becoming the new Florida head coach? How do you think he'll fare in Gainesville? Because to me, I've heard a lot of interesting views of Napier. I mean, I've heard he's more of a recruiter than Dan Mullen was. It seemed like more Dan was a player developer than a recruiter. Is that what you're hearing with Napier?
Yes, Napier runs a program. He's copied it after Nick Saban in Alabama. He worked under Dabo, he worked under Nick, and he has done at Louisiana. He's run it exactly the way that Nick would run it. And that's his thing. He is a relentless recruiter. He's young. This is the natural progression. An assistant under great coaches, successful programs. He then does his own thing for 4 years. Louisiana had never had a 10-win regular season in all the years they played football. He's just had 3 in a row. And he's playing for the conference championship. This is the natural progression. If he doesn't work out, it'll be surprising, because he's been wildly successful at every stop along the career train.
And maybe it's just a different voice, because Florida fans are probably sick and tired of Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and all these guys stealing their recruits from Florida. I mean, as Florida recruiting has, I mean, Florida State and Miami are like okay recruiting, but they've got to be better with how many recruits are in the state of Florida.
I think Mike Norvell, if you pay attention to recruiting, is doing a really good job, considering the situation he walked into, how unsuccessful they've been, a pandemic year. I think Norvell's doing a tremendous job on the trail. The problem is their program was the worst of the 3 that you just mentioned by a wide margin. Listen, Bud Elliott at 24/7 Sports has documented it for years now. The number of 5-star players in Florida who don't go to school in Florida. And Florida, for whatever reason, is losing more than half of their 5-star recruits to schools out of the state. That clearly has to stop. And Billy Napier, who's an excellent recruiter, Manny Diaz is trying to keep some of those South Florida kids home. He thinks he's starting to crack that nut, and he's going to have a good recruiting year. We'll see, D. I mean, at the end of the day, Dan Mullen, I think, is a brilliant game coach. and offensive mind. But at the end of the day, as Michael Irvin has famously said, it ain't about the X's and the O's. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes.
So now on the championship Saturday, and thinking about these championship games, first with the Big 12, if Oklahoma State beats Baylor, they're in the playoff, right?
Well,
Depending on what happens in Atlanta, maybe.
yeah, there's a couple of flies in the ointment. The one is, I think for both Cincinnati and Oklahoma State, they need Georgia to win.
Yeah.
I mean, if Georgia wins, I think most of us feel that Alabama, Ohio State, teams like that, they'll say, you know, you guys are really talented. Probably should be in the playoff, but you screwed it up, so you're staying home. And it would be Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State. But, you know, with the type of season that we've had, D, not much has gone according to form. I mean, you know, Pitt and Wake Forest is the ACC championship game. I think one of them was picked 4th and the other was picked 5th. On their side in the ACC by the media and the coaches. You know, Oklahoma State was picked 4th. Baylor was picked 8th in the Big 12. They're playing in the Big 12 championship game. You know, we can go right on down the list here. I mean, we haven't had a season like this in a while. It's been kind of fun.
Yeah, it's kind of different it's kind of unique seeing all these different teams in the playoff discussion. So
I mean, think about it. Michigan had never been in the Big Ten title game.
hadn't even been this close to the Big Ten since Chad Henne in what, 2000?
No. Remember the game with the controversial spot in overtime?
Oh yeah,
2016. So, you know, that spot goes the right way. They win the East. So, but I mean, Michigan State had been in the East twice and won the Big Ten title. Iowa had been in the game before. You know, Penn State has won the Big Ten championship game. Michigan hadn't even been in the game.
Nebraska made the Big Ten title game.
So it's been a fun year.
Yep. So to the game you'll be at, the SEC championship, we know Georgia wins there, and even if a Georgia lost, they're making the playoff, right?
You know, I've thrown this out there. If Georgia were, for whatever reason, it's an awful day, everything goes wrong, they lose 35-10. Are they in? And most people I've asked that to have kind of hemmed and hawed and said yes. So if that's the case, if that's the nightmare scenario, Georgia just has an awful day. It all goes wrong. 35-10, they lose. Are they in? If your answer is yes, then Georgia's in.
I never thought about Georgia being blown out though, because if that happened, Georgia's best win. Who would Georgia's best win be against right now? Maybe Clemson, Arkansas, maybe.
Well, the only team that's ranked right now that they've beaten is Clemson. And yes, Arkansas technically ranked. So they've got 2 wins against teams that are currently ranked.
That'd be interesting, especially if everybody else, if Michigan, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State win.
Well, then it would see the reason why I think they'd be in. Okay, you'd have Alabama, you'd have Michigan, you'd have Oklahoma State, you'd have Cincinnati. You'd have to put all 4 in ahead of them. Okay, you can justify that. But that's the nightmare scenario for Georgia. If for whatever reason, you know, it's almost like we expect, like last year, the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Anybody think they were going to get destroyed? No. You know, you might have even thought Tampa was going to win, but you didn't think they'd destroy them. That's, to me, the only scenario that I can even come up with where they're out.
So what will be the key to the SEC championship game? Because to me, Alabama has got to protect Bryce Young and can't let him run around like he did. Alabama cannot let Bryce Young run for his life against Georgia's defensive line.
Right. Alabama's got a real problem in this game. First
Yeah.
off,
Brian Robinson's not healthy.
well, but even if he was healthy, this is a below average running game for Alabama in past years. And the likelihood is they were not going to be able to run the ball against Georgia with Brian Robinson. So can a one-dimensional team do enough offensively to beat what we think is a great defense? You figure the answer is no. So to me, the only way for Alabama to win, we all, turnovers, a big special teams play, what have you. But if we're just having what we think is a normal game, Alabama's defense has to do to Georgia what Auburn's defense just did to Alabama. It's got to be Alabama's defense's day. And I will say this, Bama's run defense has been pretty good this year. And if they're going to have any chance in this game, they've got to stop the Georgia run and put the game in Stetson Bennett IV's hands. They've got one elite pass rusher. Maybe they send some guys after him, try to make them uncomfortable. I don't think Georgia's receivers are great. I think Alabama can play a lot of man coverage and roll the dice and hope that it's their day defensively. They dragged this game out, D. Remember, all the pressure's on Georgia. Everybody thinks the pressure's on Alabama because they have to win to get in. People don't realize this is the mountain for Georgia. This is the team that Kirby left Alabama to beat. All right. They have been at this. This is Kirby's 6th year. They have lost some gut-wrenching games to Alabama for an SEC championship, for a national championship. This is the mountain they can't climb. And if the game gets dragged on into the second half, even if Alabama's losing by 3 or 4 points, they'll be standing across the line of scrimmage looking at the Georgia players, just kind of smiling at them like, we got you right where we want you. You all know what happens from here, don't you? We win.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
And if this game ever turned into a shootout, who would you rather have throwing the ball, Stetson Bennett or Bryce Young?
No, I don't think Georgia will let that happen. But what Alabama, I think, wants to do is just slow play the game. And then hope that between their quarterback and their 2 elite receivers, that they'll have a chance in the fourth quarter to make 1 or 2 plays to steal the game. I mean, Alabama's an underdog for the first time in 6 years.
What?
Last time, Alabama has not been an underdog in a game since they faced Georgia the first weekend of October in 2015, when they were like a 1-point underdog at kickoff. And they won that game. They won that game by 4 touchdowns.
And that game was over at halftime.
So, Alabama gets to play the underdog card. All the pressure internally is on Georgia. I mean, I think Georgia's going to whack them. I really do. I think it's going to be 34-10. I think Georgia's going to overwhelm them. They're going to get years of frustration out. And, I think Georgia's just – I think Bryce Young is going to be running for his life 13 seconds into this game. But it will be interesting if the Alabama defense can come up with the type of effort that we saw Minnesota's defense, all right, that we saw Auburn's defense, that we saw all of the rivalry games that were phenomenal last Saturday. Who's to say Alabama now doesn't flip the script?
What percentage of the crowd will be wearing a Bulldog gear? Because I'm thinking it'll be like 70, 75, 25 for Georgia.
It won't be, because trust me, it'll be very close to 50-50. This will be the 3rd Alabama-Georgia SEC championship game that I've been a part of, either 3rd or 4th. And every time the crowd's been kind of like a Florida Georgia crowd, pretty much split down the middle.
But when Alabama and Georgia played that national title, it was more Georgia fans than anything.
Because Georgia hadn't played for the title in 35 years. And so dog fans paid more money than Bama fans did. But there'll probably be a few more Georgia fans, but I'll be surprised, D, if it's more than 60-40. I mean, trust me, Alabama fan, they planned this trip the year before. I mean, this is a rite of passage to them. This is the 13th game on their schedule. They're shocked when they're not going to Atlanta.
True. I mean, Alabama fans might as well just book the trip, and Georgia
Right.
fans may as well just stay from last week. So
Yeah, I mean, the joke is you might as well get a timeshare in Atlanta.
you will this weekend.
Now, I'm hoping it's a day trip. I'd like to sleep in my own bed Saturday night. We'll see.
Yeah. So now on to the Big Ten title game, and a great story this year. Jim Harbaugh finally getting the monkey off his back and beating the Ohio State on Saturday. And now Michigan gets its stake in finally gets its stake in the Big Ten title game with Iowa. Is this Michigan's year, or can Iowa cause another shocker in the?
Well, I mean, if you're Iowa, Penn State nearly got them, and Michigan had to have a come from behind drive in the final 6 minutes. And Iowa's got a terrific defense, just like Penn State does. So if you're Iowa, that's the game plan. I mean, you'll probably struggle to score more than 20. So you got to keep the score down. And then, Michigan's made some mistakes. I mean, they screwed up the Michigan State game, and they nearly screwed up the Penn State game. So Michigan's a better team. They should win. But, once again, who's the pressure on? Final 15 minutes, if it's a one-score game, who's the pressure on? It's on Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, because if Iowa lose this game, so what? But if Michigan loses this game, somebody's getting that playoff spot. It might be. I mean, so ultimately,
Well, if Michigan loses, I think Notre Dame's going to the playoff. I mean, Notre Dame's only one spot out of this playoff, unless Alabama, upsets Georgia. But if Georgia wins, Notre Dame needs one of two-loss teams to win. They need Baylor or Iowa. And if one of those two teams wins and Georgia wins, Notre Dame's the 4 seed.
You imagine if Brian Kelly left Notre Dame and the Irish are facing Georgia in New Year's Eve in Miami.
Yep. With their defensive coordinator / interim head coach, who basically will look Notre Dame officials right in the face and say, you've got 10 minutes. Either you give me the job full time or I'm joining Brian Kelly in Baton Rouge.
And then Tommy Reese is like the interim head coach, and the Irish have already lost the game before it began.
Right. Well, if you remember, and it's not exactly the same situation, but Cincinnati went 12-0 in 2009 when Brian Kelly got the Notre Dame job, and he bailed immediately. He did not coach Cincinnati in the Sugar Bowl, and Florida destroyed them.
I think Florida was a little PO'd with losing Alabama in that year.
I think they were too. But Notre Dame's not that far out of this thing. They're really not. They need one upset, and they're in.
So ultimately, who do you think wins on Saturday?
I think Georgia wins. I think Michigan wins. I think Oklahoma State wins. I'll tell you what, Cincinnati's going to have a really tough game.
Oh, yeah. Houston. Dana Hogan's got a good team this year.
Yep. And all the pressure in the world's on Cincinnati. So I think the Bearcats will win. They don't have a kicker. That could come back to bite them. They've managed to get through this year making less than 50% of their field goals, and it has not come back to bite them. But I think the favorites will win, and I think that's your playoff.
And if that happens, then the playoff would be, guessing Georgia would play Cincinnati in Georgia. Would Georgia play Cincinnati, Oklahoma State?
Well, I mean, I think they would just move everybody up, move Cincy up from 4 to 3. And I think we'll find out tonight. First off, do they drop Alabama? Do they keep them at 3 and not move them up? If so, they're saying to Alabama, you have to win to make the playoff. If you lose, we're going to throw you out. Also, how close do they put Oklahoma State to Cincinnati? Do they put them right behind them so that if they win against the top 10 team, they move them ahead of them? Or is there a buffer? Is there at least Notre Dame in between Cincinnati and Oklahoma State? That's worth paying attention to, I believe.
Yeah, and plus you also look at it because if let's say Oklahoma State that 4 seed next week, Georgia's not going to play that game in Arlington. They'd rather play that game in Miami.
Yep.
Thanks for hopping on to join this talk about this college football frenzy, and we wish you safe travels to New Orleans for Cowboys Saints and Atlanta for Georgia Bama.
Thanks, D. Appreciate it. All the best.